everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about a theory. And this is a theory that I read in the very beginning, right after the Idaho 4 crimes occurred and before law enforcement ever had a suspect. Now, this theory was shared by a retired law enforcement officer. And when I read it, I just felt like I needed to save it because I had a feeling that I might be referring back to it as this Idaho 4 investigation unfolded. Today we're going to talk about this theory, and I want to know what you think. But before he begins giving the details, he gives us a bit of advice, and he says we should be thinking more 7 and Zodiac rather than clues and screams. So basically what he's saying is these Idaho 4 crimes go a lot deeper than we're being led to believe. Now he also states that these victims did not know who took their lives. Their lives were taken by a stranger, according to this individual. And he also says that whoever committed these crimes was a serial attacker who had done this before. This individual believes that Steve Gonsalves is aware of this information and hinted toward that in a Fox interview just after these crimes occurred, when he said, "We're finding out there's more than just my daughter and these kids who have suffered." So basically, the individual who posted this theory believes that Steve Gonsalves is saying that this individual, whoever committed these crimes in the Idaho 4, has also taken other lives. Now, the Gonsalves family hired a private investigator because Steve Gonsalves was frustrated with investigators, if you all remember. Now, allegedly, he was also contacted by private investigators from other states because they believed that the Idaho 4 crimes were very similar to some crimes that had occurred in Oregon and Washington. The individual who shared this theory also stated that the private investigator that was working with Steve Gonsalves and the Gonsalves family was also working with other private investigators from the surrounding states because they believed that whoever committed these crimes, including the Idaho 4 crimes, was the same individual. All of these crimes had the same characteristics. Now, in the beginning, if you watched Steve Gonsalves as he was doing interviews, you can kind of tell that he appears to be holding back. It's almost as though he wants to say something. You know, he even says in some of these interviews that law enforcement does not want him to share any information with the public. Chief Fry was asked by a reporter in an interview right after the Idaho 4 crimes occurred about the Juten and Ladd cases. Now, these cases occurred in other states, one in Oregon, one in Washington. And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But Chief Fry was asked about these crimes because they were eerily similar to the Idaho 4 crimes. Now, Chief Fry says that other agencies have contacted them, with information from these other crimes out of state because of the similarities. But he also says that he doesn't believe that the Idaho 4 crimes are connected to these other cases in any way. Now, you always have to keep in mind that law enforcement can lie during the course of carrying out their duties if they believe that it could help an investigation. They can lie. Now, Ethan Chapin's dad, in an interview right after the crimes occurred, urged law enforcement to tell the truth. Why would he feel like he has to urge them to tell the truth? And did he think, or did he possibly know, that they were lying? The individual who shared this theory stated that these crimes were related. Of course, investigators are not going to want to release this information about a serial attacker so soon in the investigation. Obviously, it's going to cause panic among people in the community. Knowing that there's somebody like that in your area is definitely going to cause fear among the people who live there. Allegedly, the University of Idaho didn't even want flyers posted, seeking information about the Idaho 4 case because they believed that it could possibly hurt enrollment at the University of Idaho, as well as negatively affect the town. So they're definitely not going to release information about a possible serial murderer in their area. The announcement of a serial murderer in Moscow, Idaho, would definitely affect enrollment at the college. There's not a lot of parents who want to send their students off to school in an area that has a known danger. This would also affect businesses in this small town. If enrollment is affected at the University of Idaho, which, this is a big business. It's a university, but it's a big business, and it funds Moscow, Idaho. So if your enrollment goes down, then the businesses in the area are going to lose money. Now, think about all of the FBI profilers that were brought in to look at this case. Not agents, FBI profilers. I believe they said that there was somewhere near 30. That's a lot of profilers for a few ex-boyfriends and a food truck guy, maybe a jilted friend, or a small-time narcotics dealer who didn't get paid. There's something much bigger going on here. The response by federal law enforcement and federal investigators would lead us to believe that this was something much bigger than just somebody who went into a house to take the lives of 4 individuals. This might be why we're seeing so much secrecy involved in this trial. It's very possible that there's multiple investigations going on involving the Idaho 4 case. It's possible that there could be an investigation from Oregon and an investigation from Washington tied into this Idaho 4 investigation. And that would explain why there's so much secrecy, because they don't want to compromise any of these investigations. So on that note, let's talk about these cases that were out of town that happened just a few years prior to the Idaho 4 case. In the early morning hours between 3 and 4 a.m. on August the 13th, 2021, in Salem, Oregon, Travis Juton and his wife Jamelyn were attacked in their home as they slept in their bed by an assailant with a knife. Now, do those times and that day of the month sound familiar? Travis Jewton fought this attacker, and unfortunately, he lost his life. Jamelin was stabbed 19 times and miraculously survived this attack after many, many surgeries. There was also a guest who was staying with the Jewtons that night. So she was present as these crimes were occurring. And she heard the screams. She heard the commotion. And as most of us would do, she called 911 immediately. Unfortunately, law enforcement didn't get there in time, and this attacker was able to get away. On June 14th of 2020, in Washougal, Washington, 71-year-old Sandra Ladd was found deceased in her home. Now, investigators believe that her life was taken by an assailant with a knife in the early morning hours of June 13th. Sound familiar? Sandra Ladd was stabbed multiple times, and this case is still open. Washougal, Washington is only 5 hours and 40 minutes from Moscow, Idaho. It's interesting that the Ladd case happened in 2020. One elderly female victim. The Jewton case occurred in 2021. 2 young adult victims with a guest left alive and unharmed in the house, as well as a pet. And the Idaho 4 in 2022. 4 young adult victims, 2 individuals left in the house alive, unharmed, and there's also a pet. So all of these crimes appear to be eerily similar. And it also appears that this could be an individual who's possibly ramping up. You know, a serial murderer who's possibly becoming more and more confident. You know, maybe started out with 1 elderly victim and then moved up to 2 young adult victims, also leaving an individual alive as well as a pet inside the house. Then you have the Idaho 4 crimes. Maybe they moved up to 4 young adult victims, leaving 2 individuals alive and unharmed in the house, as well as a pet. So it appears that all 3 of these crimes are very similar. You know, they all happened on the 13th of the month. They all happened in the early morning hours between 3 and 4. And they were all attacked by an assailant with a knife while they were in their beds. All of these victims in all 3 crimes were stabbed multiple times. And all 3 of these crimes happened within a 6.5 hour radius of each other. So they were all pretty close. Now, as I said, this is a theory that I came across in the very beginning when the Idaho 4 investigation first began. Before law enforcement had a suspect, before Brian Koberger was arrested. it's definitely something that I've thought a lot about because it would make sense that law enforcement in Moscow, Idaho, as well as the university, would not want to release any information about a possible serial murderer in their area. As I said, it would greatly affect enrollment, which would definitely affect their financial situation in Moscow, Idaho. It would affect businesses. So it would make sense that they would not want to put this information out there. Aside from the financial impact that it would have on this small town, it would definitely, strike fear in the people who live in Moscow, Idaho. So it seems as though even if this was a serial attacker, that this would be something that law enforcement would want to keep under wraps. And maybe this is why, as I said, there's so much secrecy surrounding this investigation. If they start releasing information about the Idaho 4 investigation, it could impact the other investigations, the investigation that's happening in Oregon with the Juten case, the investigation that's happening in Washington with the Ladd case. Maybe that's why there's so much secrecy surrounding this case. I've always felt that the University of Idaho has a lot of influence in this investigation, which would make sense because the university is the main source of funding for this small town. So they've had their hands in this investigation from the very beginning. And it would make sense that they wouldn't want to release any information about a serial murderer. That would greatly affect their enrollment, which, as I said, would trickle down to small businesses and ultimately, affect their economy. So it would make sense. This was a theory that I came across in the very beginning when I began researching the Idaho 4 crimes. And I've always held on to it because in the back of my mind, I've always felt like this is definitely a possibility. And today, I just wanted to share that theory with you. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. We'll see you next time.